Coming up next on This Week in Computer Hardware, all your solid-state drive questions answered. Do CPUs still impact gaming performance? Z77 meets ITX motherboards, Corsair's Super PSU, all that and more coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 184, recorded on August 30th, 2012. Cornucopia of SSD answers. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton, and this is the show on TWiT where we try to bring you the best and most exciting news in computer hardware. We concentrate on the PC, we talk about the Mac, and of course we get a little bit happy with the, tablets and phones out there too, because they're getting pretty important. Got a special edition for you. Ryan's actually out taking care of family this week, but we have Allyn Malventano, PCPer.com storage guru. He's going to be answering a whole bunch of your SSD questions later in the show. Allyn, welcome to Twitch.
Thanks for having me.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. How you doing?
I'm excited. It's been pretty crazy. The prices this week, there's been some ridiculous SSD updates. Actually, 120 gigabyte Vertex 3 showed up $55 after rebate, $79 at the door. And for about 5 minutes, you could buy 60 gigabyte OCZ R2s for $29 after a rebate. And the 120 gigabyte Samsung 830 is still under $100 over at Amazon.com with no rebate, which I'm pretty excited about. Is it... We have a lot of questions coming about this later in the show, but are SSD prices falling because new models are coming out, or because the cost of memory is reducing, or because what's going on with SSD pricing?
I think it's a little bit of both, but it's been sort of touch and go. There was, I think, 2 or 3 months back, there was a whole bunch of sales going on, a whole bunch of rebates, and then this past month, they just sort of seemed to taper off a little bit, and they all just sort of stuck at retail prices, and then here's another wave again. So I think it maybe just maybe the fabs are just pushing out batches, not inconsistently, or just batches are getting bought up. I don't know. Who knows? Might be like maybe Apple bought up a whole big chunk of flash memory for some new product that was going to come out, and then
it just seems amazing. Like in the last 12 months, we've gone from typically like over $200 for 120 gigabyte, maybe even more than that. And all of a sudden, it's almost getting easy to spend less than $100 on a 120 gigabyte hard drive, or I should say 120 gigabyte SSD. At this point, standard solid state drives, your 1 terabyte drives are well under $100 again at this point, and 2 and 3 terabyte drives have dropped a bunch.
Yeah, and for the amount, for the performance difference you get with solid state now, it's just there's not even an excuse anymore. Really, there just isn't.
Well, unless you like a terabyte or 4 of storage.
Well, but that all doesn't need to be your operating system, Thank goodness.
So, Corsair's got the new Neutron family of SSDs with the Lambda controller. What's going on with those?
Yeah, we're actually looking at them right now. Actually, I have them sitting right on the test bed. They're seems to perform pretty well. It was a very little known company. The company just seemingly came out of nowhere, and then Corsair, I think, was the first company to announce they were going to use a controller and something, and it's out, and it's seems pretty decent. We can't really speak to reliability or any of that stuff right now because, again, these just came out not too long ago. I don't even think they're shipping in any kind of decent volume yet, actually. But yeah, just something, another controller to keep your eye on, right? And see how things pan out. Hopefully, hopefully for some really low prices. Again, just like what we're seeing from the other drives.
Do you get nervous about new controllers? I mean, do you want to let somebody else try them out, or do you figure like, oh, go ahead, buy that latest controller, work with whatever firmware is on there, just make sure you back your stuff up?
I will shy away from recommending something like brand new, really. Especially, okay, so I used to be really gung-ho about, oh, hey, look, there's this new one, it performs really well. Just make sure you're backed up and you should be safe. Problem is, 80% of people are not backing up anyway, right? At least not consistently. And So the reality of it is that if there's any possibility of a flaky kind of controller or something you just won't know until it's too late, you're talking about something that has your stuff stored on it, right? So it's not like and these are harder to deal with than, say, a hard drive where, well, for one thing, when's the last time you heard of a firmware issue with a hard drive?
Not in the last decade.
Well, no, I mean there was one. It was what was it? Seagate had a weird issue with drives, but that was only if they were in a RAID and they would time out occasionally and that sort of thing. But that was years back, right? That was almost a decade ago, I think. But yeah, solid state is just much more of a different animal, right? It's at least with the hard drive, if that stuff was absolutely vital, you could probably ship it off somewhere, and those guys could probably swap out a board, and it was a mechanical thing. It's like reading a record, right? So chances are you can just get another record player and you can still listen to the music.
So we should make that clear.
It's more tricky.
If you have a data failure, or I should say, if your solid state drive fails, there's a 0% chance of you getting the information back off that drive, or is there a possibility of recovery?
There are chances. Actually, the chances are very good, but it depends on what company is doing the recovery, how close ties they have with the controller manufacturer, if any.
Right.
Basically, what has to happen is the controller stores the data in whatever it's however they design the controller, right? That data is spread out over flash chips. Well, there are companies out there that can take a flash chip off of a PCB and they can dump its contents. The problem is figuring out how to stitch it all back together once you've done that. So you have to know how the controller was storing that data, what the methods were, so that you can basically reverse engineer it and get that stuff back out. So if the controller fails on an SSD, it does not mean that all your data is actually gone. There is a way to get it back. It's just prohibitively expensive, really, is the way to go there for the best answer. But yeah, if it's if you have enough money and money, heat, power, tools, something to throw at a problem, you can eventually get past it, right?
Right.
But if you just bought the drive for like $50 on a blowout sale and you just have your operating system and some files on it, then you're not going to have a couple of grand to throw at it to get those 5 pictures that, oh my God, you really have to have, right?
Or if you do have a couple of grand to throw at it, maybe you should have spent the extra $50 or $100 to get a Samsung or an Intel SSD and avoid all the recovery problems in the first place.
There's that and backup. Yeah.
Backing up is good. Have you ever wondered how much your CPU actually impacted gaming performance? Tech Report did something really cool. They took an XFX Radeon HD 7950 double dissipation 3GB card with Catalyst 12.3 drivers and paired it with 18 different CPUs from Intel and AMD. So it took 5 motherboards, 8 different AMD chips, 11 different Intel processors. I guess it's 19 total, although I thought they said 18 in the article. And looked at gaming, video transcoding in the background while gaming to look at multitasking. It's pretty cool. Go over to techreport.com and look for the article. It is pretty amazing, especially if you go to the last page and take a look at the sort of scatter, what they call the 99th percentile frames per second per dollar chart on that. And it goes from everything from an i7-3960X, which is a $1,000 part, all the way down to the A3850. And it's kind of amazing what you're looking at in terms of frames per second for performance for gaming. And the benchmarks are also really interesting. I'm not going to talk too much more about it because I think you should go read the Tech Report article. It's the name of the article is Inside the Second Gaming Performance with Today's CPU. And it's an interesting sort of question they're trying to answer. Does the processor you choose still matter? The answer is yes, but in some areas it may not matter as much as you might expect. That was an interesting read for me. It made me realize that I can probably wait a little longer to upgrade my 920, my beloved Core i7-920. AMD's unveiled some steamroller improvements. Hot Chips 2012 is the gathering, but they basically talked about the Kavari APU that's due out in 2013, the next generation steamroller core. And if you've been waiting to buy an AMD FX CPU, you should be excited because prices have dropped. AMD has revealed a new FX 4130 CPU, and they have new processing for desktop processors. So if you're looking at 6-core processors, you're talking about a $20 reduction on the AMD FX 8150. AMD FX 6200 is dropped from 153 to 132. And at the low end, something like an AMD A6 3650, a quad-core APU, something that would be nice for an entry-level home theater PC has gone from $91 to $77, all the way down to the AMD A4 3300, which I think is like the AD 3300 QJHX box, which has dropped from $53 to $46. So if you've been thinking about buying an AMD APU or CPU, it's a good time to look at it. Prices have dropped, probably 10 to $20 across the board. So another interesting article. Have you been following the attempts of Apple and Qualcomm, amongst others, to sort of partner up with TSMC?
Yes,
Alan?
And yeah, specifically the Apple one. We were sort of chuckling about that amongst ourselves at PC Per. All the guys are just sort of got a chuckle when they saw that, because it was really just like a smackdown, because TSMC was just like, no thanks. Sorry.
So Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, if you're not familiar with it, is an independent fab. A lot of people bring their designs there, and apparently both in their investors meeting, TSMC basically told both Apple and Qualcomm, both of whom walked up with $1 billion and said, we want exclusive capacity. We want you to set aside production for us. And TSMC said, no, we don't need your money. We don't want your control. I do like the title from the PC Per article. The article's up on Digitime. PC Per said, quote, exclusive partner is another word for single point of failure. And I thought that was a great title. I don't have the link to that article. I apologize to whoever at PC Per wrote that one up, but that is a
probably Jeremy, I'm guessing.
That's it has the Jeremy vibe to it.
Yes.
Do you care about wireless charging for your phone? Are you eagerly anticipating this being a part of your life, Alan?
I honestly don't. I'm sorry to say. I don't need it. I don't need a little magical pad that I just put my phone on. I can just plug it in. I don't need like radiation emanating from my table. I don't know. You ever seen those power lines in the field and somebody sets up some grounded fluorescent lights at the bottom of it, and the lights light up and they're like 50 feet away?
Man I used to deliver furniture for, owned a furniture shop in beautiful Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Could not buy this house he'd been living in for 25 years, rented it from the power company because they basically bought all of the farms that their high-tension power lines went on. And at one point, he went into the back holding a fluorescent bulb underneath the gigantic tower that held up the electrical lines, and it would glow if it was a particularly humid day or if the fog was out. Part of the reason I bring this up is Jeremy Hellstrom wrote up on PCPer.com, wireless charging technology one step closer to reality. Intel's released information, quote, on their long-standing wireless power technology and their new development partner, Integrated Device Technology. And, of course, we've been hearing about wireless power. The first time we saw it was at CES a few years ago, and it was a pretty awesome idea in this demo at CES, the idea that you would place items on your desk and they would be basically there would be a near field transfer of electrical power, so you could power your monitor, your computer, lamps, other devices, a blender, without actually having to have power cables. And in reality, it's ended up being like, okay, I take my iPhone, I put a giant thing on the back of it, a sleeve, and then I drop the sleeve on the pad, and then it will charge, it just hasn't really taken off. It's certainly available in a bunch of areas, but there's now the Wireless Power Consortium, which was presenting at CES 2012. It's interesting.
It is. I just think it adds, I think it adds a little bit too much weight to things at present. And you have manufacturers are trying to figure out how to cram as much battery as possible into these devices, and they're getting more power hungry, even though you have OLED screens and all these other things that are power saving features. But the CPUs get more power hungry. They keep trying to pile more and more tech into them, and there's just not enough room to put this, winding this coil, when really it could just be the regular charging circuit in these devices is tiny compared to the thing you have to stick in there to do near field charging. So I don't know.
It'll be interesting. Integrated Device Technology says that they will basically their system isn't limited to inductive charging. and it quotes smartphone on a charging mat usage. So it'll be interesting. Resonance wireless charging technology. We wait with bated breath 2013 for prototype chipsets to go out to vendors, which I assume means we probably won't see product till 2014 or beyond. And hopefully for them, people are more excited about wireless charging than Allyn is.
Sorry.
It's okay. In the strange but power supply department, Corsair's AX1200i digital ATX 1200 watt power supply. Last week we talked about a power supply that was overclockable. Did you guys talk about the AX1200i last night? This is kind of fascinating to me.
I don't think we talked about what was it? Last night we talked about the EVGA 1500 watt overclockable power supply, which was a beast and a half, which I guess you guys talked about last week, right?
Right. So Lee Garvin,
I guess
Robotech wrote one up for PC Per. It's Corsair's latest flagship power supply, 1200 watts, which basically, unless you're running 2 or 3 graphics cards and a large pile of hard drives, is more power than you need. But the Corsair AX1200i is a smart power supply that incorporates a digital signal processor to deliver extremely clean, efficient power with the ability to make real-time adjustments to various internal parameters. So it's a beautiful power supply if you're into power supply aesthetics, which for some reason makes me laugh. And it's interesting. Finally, something new and innovative in the PC power supply market, writes Lee. Corsair's new smart PSU, the X1200i Digital, incorporates the embedded DSP, which works with the Corsair Link software, which allows the end user to monitor and adjust several power supply parameters like performance, noise, and overcurrent protection. So it's interesting. Many other Corsair products also support the Link technology, solid-state drives, memory modules, water cooling, case fans, lighting subsystems, GPU nodes for monitoring PCI Express current loads. So you can build a state-of-the-art high-end gaming system with a built-in data acquisition and control system. Gold award from PC Per, so that is a big, fat, gigantic thumbs up for Corsair's latest flagship power supply unit.
I'm pretty sure Lee sits up there, and I think he's close to Ryan. I think he's up there in Kentucky somewhere. And I think he just sits there and arc welds with these things. There's so much power coming out of these things.
Well, if you look at Burke, I don't know if we can get the picture, the sort of see-through picture on the first page of the review, back up on that again. But if you take a look at the number, there's just, if you look on the right side of that picture, I'm looking at like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 distinct different power jacks or basically like Molex connectors for internal devices, and then the main ATX connector down below that. So this is a whole lot of power supply, to say the least. Yep. I just want to know more about how the DSP actually corrects the voltage in real time. Also, I got to say it, I want EVGA's ITX Z77 motherboard. Overclockaholic, or OCaholic, actually got hands on this for a short preview. So it's essentially a Z77 mini-ITX board. EVGA actually has been coming out with some really nice products, and Tim Very did the write-up for PCPer.com. Top right corner of the mini-ITX motherboard features red power and reset buttons, as well as an LED display capable of displaying error codes should you push the board so far and it fails to post UEFI or UEFI BIOS. You can overclock and reset the board. It's really nice. PCI Express 3.0 16 slot for adding a graphics card. This is a really tempting board if you want to cram a whole lot of power in a very small or very custom case.
And home theater PC too.
Yeah, this would be
that's like perfect.
This would be a killer home theater PC if you wanted to do high-end gaming on it, like HDMI, gigabit LAN, possibly a Thunderbolt, or at least a mini DisplayPort on there. Realtek 8-channel controllers. It's kind of funny because, like, as you look at all of the connectivity on this board, you would go from a mini ITX case to, something big enough to hold all of the drives this thing could hold. Would be pretty crazy. But I want that board. I'm a little afraid to find out what it's going to cost. So
I don't know. I mean, I would hope it would be decent.
So Twitch at twit.tv, that's the email address we normally use. And we want to thank you for joining us. If you like our show, do us a favor, please subscribe through iTunes or through twit.tv/twitch, where you can find all the older episodes of the show. We're going to hold off on the GPU coverage until Ryan gets back next week, because Allyn's here, the SSD expert, the storage expert for PCPro.com, and we got a festival of solid-state drive questions on Twitter. At Malventano, if you actually want to talk to Allyn on Twitter, I've just now exposed you to the universe, Allyn, so everyone can track you down to ask you their individual SSD questions, and I probably apologize for that.
No, actually, I get them all the time on the Twitter.
That would make sense. So
yeah.
We should probably start with Coffee Geek. He says, I got two questions, Patrick. Can data be recovered from SSDs? We answered that earlier in the show. Kind of, if you have a lot of money. And what's the failure rate of SSDs? There was a big deal about a year ago where people were just running into failures of SSDs, and whether it was issues with the power locally or because the storage gods hated them. How are you feeling about SSD stability? I should say that also because Mark Allen tweeted, do SSDs have a lifespan like hard disk drives? Will we ever see a solid-state drive or any physical media that can avoid an eventual impending death? And Alden added, is SSD lifespan something a user should worry about? Brandon added, just ordered my first solid-state drive ever for my netbook earlier. How is reliability with modern SSDs? There's a lot of questions about, people are a little uptight about solid-state drive technology.
Yeah. And here's
should they be?
Yeah, I know. This is a big one to answer, actually. Okay. So when Intel started releasing some really heavy hitting SSDs back in the day, like X25M, G2, etc., even Intel had a couple of odd firmware, like little quirks or bugs, if you will, and they had to post fixes. And it was things that would just give you some kind of random incompatibility with certain. I think there was a MacBook issue with one of the second gen X25Ms way back when. So you're going to get odd kind of issues even with the best companies as far as, compatibility stuff. Sometimes it just crops up. But those kinds of issues were just compatibility. It wasn't like all your data's gone. Then Sandforce had some weird buggy firmware when their devices came out. And that sort of gave SSDs in general a bad rap because Sandforce was pretty much everybody was picking them up. Right? On the SSD decoder page, you go to the Sandforce section, and it's like every single company is on there as having a product that had their chips in them. So you combine that firmware with the fact that most of the companies didn't roll their own firmware. They just went with whatever Sandforce gave them. And there were some weird issues. Like in some kind of certain, I think it had something to do with standby. It ended up affecting mostly laptops, from what I recall. But desktops were not immune. There was just some kind of weird startup condition where it would basically brick the controller, like
that's
for
bad.
Good. Yeah, like the controller was just done, and then you have to get back into what I mentioned earlier about the only way to get the data back is to somehow get around the controller, which would mean reading all the flash chips. That's really the only way to pop it out of that, to get your stuff back off. So those are really bad things, right? And that gives solid-state drives a really bad name when that kind of thing happens. And it happened, unfortunately. So probably most of the damage to SSDs in general, as far as why we just got probably half of the questions that came in actually after you did that tweet an hour ago, Patrick, was
right.
Half of them all had to do with reliability, really. And unfortunately, that's the reason because of that. So my recommendations nowadays are to go with Intel or Samsung. Those are my two favorites right now. And the reason is, and also to sort of go into what is the failure rate of SSDs, because we can answer that too. Intel's number, I don't remember the exact figure, but it's between 1% and 2%, what they shoot for on failure rate, which is basically the failure rate you expect for any kind of a solid-state device. I mean, motherboards, sort of the same failure rate, any of those things. And that's what they shoot for, and that's actually what they see on their products. I've been to press briefings from them, and they've said, okay, here's what our numbers are, that sort of thing. So Intel does really, really well. And Samsung, I used to shy away from recommending them because the performance just wasn't as good as Intel or even Sandforce for that matter. However, once the 830 series came out, all that pretty much just got left in the dust because the 830 is one of the best performing solid-state drives out there. And that they're going to be compatible because the Samsung 830 controller is the one that's in all of the Macs.
Right.
That's what Apple uses exclusively, and they're in a bunch of other OEM systems too. So Dell OEM stuff typically is Samsung. Even when they didn't perform that great, They were still OEM. They were all over the place. So you're just not going to see weird issues with them. So Intel, the quality control is real good. Samsung, the quality control, and most recently, the performance is really good. Those are just the ways to go. In general, if you haven't seen some kind of a weird issue in a few months, that's the one hurdle you got to get over, right? The infant mortality, really. And that applies for any solid state device, right? Anything with chips in it. If it lasts for the first couple of months, it's probably going to last you for years.
The truth is, if it lasts through the first 72 hours, it's probably going to last you a few years, assuming you've got a decent power supply inside your PC, or don't, fling your tablet or your computer onto the floor in a huff, right? Which tends to reduce the lifespan of something with a screen really dramatically. So to kind of summarize is, there were some early hiccups being a gentle word for massive failures. It got a lot of publicity on the internet because Reddit is amazing. And, of course, the hardware vendors. Your favorites at this point, Samsung, especially if you're looking at MacBook compatibility. But Samsung and Intel being the two most reliable. They deliver excellent performance. You're not particularly saying other brands are not worth buying, but if it was your money, basically, you're buying Intel or Samsung.
Yes, I have personally, all of my own personal data is either on Samsung or Intel for the computers I'm using.
It's all backed up, of course, in a 3-2-1 backup configuration also.
Yes, actually, believe it or not. The really critical stuff is the 3. But so there's one little last aspect to what people typically worry about for solid-state drive longevity, and that's actually wearing out the flash. Right? Because the flash memory does wear out. It is possible. And here's the thing. If you get any kind of a decent capacity solid-state drive, the endurance of modern flash memory is high enough, and the controllers are smart enough about where to put the data and how often to reuse places that I have my first Intel X25M that I have rewritten. I don't even remember what the number is now. I think it's over 100 terabytes, too.
Wow.
It was only an 80 gigabyte drive. It's the drive that I beat up when I did the first review and had all the first, issues, and the first piece I published about the drive slowing down over time, all those things. And I continued to beat the crap out of that drive for years after. And the thing is still kicking, and it has very few sectors mapped out that are bad. So if you're using one of these drives for anything outside of an enterprise database capacity, you're just probably not going to do enough to it to burn it out, even within 5 years, maybe even 10 years. You're probably going to outgrow whatever the device is that it's powering, that it's storing data for. You're going to be done with that before you burn the drive out.
So this would be a good place to segue to a question from Dave, who writes in, why are commercial SSDs so expensive? Seems pricey to buy servers with them. Is that because they are enterprise grade and they're designed for a considerably higher number of rewrites than a consumer grade drive?
Yes, mainly. That's the long and short of it. A little bit more detail is, and this is weird though, don't buy an enterprise-grade solid-state drive if you're using a desktop. Don't do the overkill. Because what happens is they're just configured to do different kinds of workloads. The firmware is optimized for, say, something like just pure database access. So while that drive will be able to keep its performance up, and perform very well after getting hit with this crazy random access for days or years, right? It's sort of like tortoise and the hare. That enterprise drive is not going to be as fast out of the gate compared to the consumer drive. Now, since the consumer drive is just seeing typical consumer kind of use, which is really generally light compared to enterprise use, it's actually able to outperform the enterprise drive most of the time for the kinds of things that you're going to be doing, right? The enterprise drive sacrifices some of that out of the gate speed for the long run, the long steady state speed. That's the difference between the two. So sure, I mean, you can use it, but you actually get a little bit of a bigger boost for a lower price. It's just that if you took that consumer drive and put it in a database server, it would slow to a crawl within probably an hour. And it would definitely be going slower than your enterprise drive. It would just still be chugging along nicely.
So interesting kind of side question from at JNev. With commercial SSD drives, are there wear leveling issues with extended use? And my thought would be no, because it has the same sort of wear leveling or a commercial grade wear leveling. That's a tough word to say with braces. Wear leveling algorithm designed into the configuration.
Yeah, that too is different between the two of them. The consumer grade drives tend, at least now, the consumer grade drives tend to rely a little bit more on trim. Because they're assuming everybody's running Windows 7, everybody has some way to trim the drive. Actually, the Intel drives a couple of years back started to lean more heavily on that to the point where they would actually go slower over time if you ran them without trim, as compared to if you'd ran them with, because it was relying on it, right? It was like, okay, well, what is empty space? Well, the only way the drive knows is trim, which is just a way that the operating system can tell the drive, hey, I deleted a file over there. Is basically all that happens. And then the drive goes, oh, okay, I don't have to keep track of that spot anymore. And then it disregards it. Basically, it's a little database entry internal to the drive. So it gets rid of that info, and then now it's free to shuffle those blocks around with the rest of the spare space, basically. That's what makes the drive faster, is that it doesn't have to do as much musical chairs with your data as stuff's being moved around. So enterprise drives tend to not assume that you're using trim, because they assume that you just have a huge database file. It takes the whole drive front to back. The thing is full, because you're an enterprise. You're not going to buy more than you need. Why would you do that? That's silly. The suits are never going to approve that one, right? So the assumption is that the drive is running at full capacity and is just being hammered with stuff, and trim just doesn't even happen for those types of devices. So again, it's totally different rework. The wear leveling in general operates the same sort of way. It's in general, it will try to spread all of those writes out evenly over all of the flash memory. So between enterprise and consumer, that part's the same. It's just some of the other intricate details that are different.
Some of the intricate details are slightly different.
Just slightly.
At Daniel 5724, with SSD, are there any utilities I should run? Windows, Mac, also, which is better at managing solid state drives, Windows or OS 10? And I should point out, do not defrag your SSD. This is a bad thing. Do not run defragmenting tools on your SSD. And we've seen a couple sort of, in the early days, there were a couple of cases where some traditional sort of defragmenting type vendors or hard drive software vendors kind of said they had the tool for keeping your SSD alive longer. Is there any reason to run any additional, as long as trim is turned on in your operating system? Is there anything else you should be running, Allyn?
Trim is the best way to go. There are some tools out there that, and these are tools specific to the manufacturers, first of all, because it has to be a tool that can speak to the firmware, to the actual controller of the drive. So Intel has a thing called SSD Toolbox. OCZ has OCZ Toolbox. Samsung has SSD Magician, I think. I don't know. They just ran out of Toolbox names or something. Yeah. So those manufacturers have those kinds of tools. Most of them just go in there and make sure that the good stuff for drive maintenance is just already on. So, like the Intel tool, make sure that Windows doesn't try to defrag it. I think it turns off super fetch, stuff like that. Things that you just don't need because the SSD is fast enough on its own that you don't need to try to boost stuff, artificially, because it actually ends up just slowing it down compared to what it could do before. And a few of the tools have the ability to go in there. I think the OCZ tool can go in there and it can just force trim the drive.
Oh, so, cool.
Say, and this was really something you had to do only with Windows XP, right? And that was sort of the way to defrag, if you will, the SSD. Just it would go through and it would find, okay, where's all the space that's free on the drive, and then it would just tell the drive where the free space was, and then the drive could actually, do what trim would normally have done. But that stuff is sort of phased out because everybody's on Windows 7. I don't think any of those tools are Mac compatible. However, OS 10, starting about more than a year ago, just natively supported trim anyway. I'll qualify that by saying specific to Apple OEM SSDs. However, there's a tool, and it's just like Trim Enabler or something like that, that if you're on OS 10, you can sort of trick OS 10 into thinking that your aftermarket solid-state drive is a Samsung or whatever the type is that, that they put in it. And it sort of just tricks it into using trim like it should. So as long as you've done something like that, you're fine. You really don't need to do the crazy maintenance stuff. Windows 7 by default, if it sees that a drive is a solid-state drive, which it figures out by asking what RPM it's spinning at, by the way. And so, I guess the drive is like, well, there's just a bunch of chips here. So it answers 0 if it's a solid-state drive. And if it sees 0 for that result, it disables automatic defrag just automatically. It just happens. Don't go in there and try to defrag yourself. If there's some company that has some tool that says it can defrag an SSD, guess what? If it's doing anything to the SSD, it's wearing it out. So
that would be bad.
Right? In order to move stuff around, you're wearing it out. The way that a typical defrag program moves data around on a solid-state drive actually fragments it worse on the inside. So yeah, if you want your drive to run really, really slow, run like the Windows XP defrag on your C drive and see how long, see how fast it reboots the next time. It won't be very happy.
I hate it when that happens. Trim Enabler, I think, is groths.org, which is the blog of Oscar Groth, also known as Sindori, and that is a free download. And I think Tizzy updated it in August.
There's really not much to that tool, so it wouldn't surprise me if you didn't.
It's support for more SSDs will come, so it's something worth checking out. A lot of notes on the site on that. Gross.org is the website, and we have a link to that in the show notes. Mark Allyn, Tamal, both have the same, and several other people both basically had the same question, which is, when will SSDs hit hard disk drive prices, or will we see multi-terabyte solid-state drives anytime soon? And I should probably qualify that last question for Mark Allyn. Will we see multi-terabyte solid-state drives anytime soon at consumer prices? Because if memory serves, if you have $15,000, $20,000, you can pick up a multi-terabyte PCI Express card that will hold all the data you can afford to fill it with if you can still pay for your internet connection after you buy that particular drive.
Oh, yeah. OCZ makes a Revo R4 that we looked at. I think it was last year, actually. Yeah. And that was 1.6 terabytes.
That's a lot of
storage. Yeah, it was a huge board, a lot of flash memory on it. It had like 8 SSD controllers all running in a RAID on a board, and it was a beast. But yeah, it was pricey, right? So it's really just about the cost per gig is actually pretty level now. Like you'll see, it used to be that the top tier of capacity would always be this. You'd have to pay some kind of a surplus for that,
right?
Compared to like the mid, there would just be like a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. And anymore, it seems like even the Samsung makes a 0.5 terabyte A30 series, and the cost per gig on that is usually right around what the rest of them are outside of sales. So yeah, it's just a matter of what the cost per gig is, and that's going down slowly. Still, it's taking its sweet time, but it's definitely going down slowly. It's probably progressing about the same kind of rate as what we used to see for just CPU technology advances in general, any kind of solid state thing, right? The price just drops over time. And it's, the same case is going on for the drives now. It's just a waiting game. It's just you have to wait for it to get cheaper. It's there's going to be, I'm sure in a year or two, you'll have 1 terabyte solid state drives that are 2.5-inch drives. You just drop right in a laptop. I'm sure they'll be, commonplace enough where people are just using those instead.
It's also probably worth saying that by the time we get to sort of a 1 terabyte, $500 or $250 solid state drive, we'll probably have 6 gigabyte or 8 gigabyte rotating media drives they're competing against in the market, which sounds kind of ridiculous. But, every time you think that rotating media is done, you turn around and they've made another advancement in the number of platters they can stuff in a given enclosure size or the aerial density on those particular platters. That always kind of blows my mind when you turn around and like, how big is that hard drive? It's so small.
Yeah, they are still making advances.
Orlando says, is it true the more data you put on a solid state drive, the slower it will get?
That's a loaded answer.
Or loaded question.
Number one, depends on the controller. Okay, so this is one of those things where an enterprise class drive probably wouldn't slow down a bit, but it wouldn't run as fast at the beginning, right? That sort of thing. Intel drives, if you run them without trim, the more stuff you put on them, the more it actually will start taking away from performance a little bit, even on random access. Even if you wrote one huge file front to back on an Intel drive, just the fact that you allocated all of that space, it has to go through this huge database now every time you access stuff, right? So it actually does slow it down a little bit. It's not horrible, but it does have a little bit of an effect. That's why trim will actually bring the speed back up, because if you deleted that huge file, it wipes out the whole database all at the same time. The drive's basically brand new, right? So a solid-state drive will typically sit somewhere, at some steady-state value between its worst, fullest, slowest, and, its brand new speed. What also affects that is how much small random access you do to it. So if you write a whole bunch of really tiny files to that solid-state drive, that will slow it down, because that makes even more database entries, even more shuffling around of data has to happen. And that just lies with how flash memory stores its stuff. So you can't just erase, you can't just go in there and erase one character and rewrite it on flash memory. It just doesn't work that way. You can only erase it in like half a megabyte chunks. So when it's that large and you're writing a bunch of random small 4 kilobyte files to the thing for some reason, it's got to do a bunch of musical chairs to make that happen. So that kind of stuff slows it down. Generally, a consumer drive will probably stay within, 50 to 75% of the rough speed of when it was new, as long as you're not doing anything really crazy to it. You just do a Windows install, you put some MP3s on it, you install some games, it'll still stay pretty snappy.
So Amar B asks, is trim actually necessary with a Sandforce controller? And Matthew asks, is it best to go with Sandforce drives like Intel's 330 or say the Samsung 830 without the 8 gigabyte anti-degradation space? I mean, I would say trim would be a good idea even if you have a Sandforce controller, wouldn't it?
Yes, Sandforce does use trim. Here's the reason that not using trim does not affect Sandforce as badly. Okay. Sandforce is one of the few controllers that compresses data as it stores it. It's actually doing, like, from the DOS days, it's actually doing Stacker. Remember Stacker 3?
Distantly and painfully.
Yeah. So you used to be able to do these things to compress your C drive down so you can actually get more artificial space out of your drive. Well, Sandforce controllers do the opposite. Okay, so they'll say you have 120 gigabytes worth of flash memory. That will give you a 120 gigabyte drive. However, if you wrote 125 gigabytes of normal, typical consumer data to it, it probably only wrote like between 60 and 90 to it. So what that ends up working out to you is there's a lot of extra spare space on the drive. So that whole musical chairs thing I was talking about earlier, if you have all that extra physical space available, it slows down much less, right? Because it has more wiggle room to shuffle things around. And that's actually a trick you can do to even a drive that doesn't do compression. You can just partition it, only use half the drive, only use 3/4 of the drive. That'll help it run faster more of the time. Sandforce just sort of, I don't want to say it's cheating, because it doesn't really slow it down. It's a hardware compression. It's completely transparent. You have no idea it's happening. But the end result is that, yes, Sandforce drives do have the advantage where even if you run them without trim, they just have so much extra space usually that the performance stays higher for longer.
It's a good thing.
Yeah,
a couple last questions before we turn you loose. James says, will solid-state drives work in older laptops and tablets like the HP TC4400? Would there be any benefit to putting a solid-state drive in it? Thanks. Basically, James, I got to say, as long as there's a SATA controller inside the notebook, you should be able to run a solid-state drive in it. A lot of people get obsessed, like, I don't have a 6 gigabit, I don't have the latest SATA connection. I wouldn't get too worried about that. It'll do things like, and I probably should just shut up and let Allyn talk. It's just amazing how much faster a notebook boots with a solid state drive, how much faster you remove from, you sort of restart from suspend, or hibernation starts feeling like you've just shut the lid. It's just, I would say yes. I mean, is there anywhere you would not recommend people use a solid state drive at this point? You obviously being the biggest cheerleader ever for SSDs, Allyn.
I don't know. I mean, if it's such an old laptop, okay. So I've actually seen this. I've seen a laptop that was so old that it was actually just completely CPU bottlenecked because the person was trying to run Windows 7 on this thing that was too old. And so, yes, a solid state drive helped, but nowhere near as much as it would have helped in a newer system, right? So there is a difference. Don't get me wrong, but there are ways where if the hardware is so underpowered that you just immediately run into a different bottleneck, right? So now it's not. So it'll be. Don't get me wrong. The boot time will still be much faster than it was. Anything having to do with random access, much faster than it was. But they go to fire up Office, for example, which I usually use as like the test of showing someone the difference, right? You fresh boot, you go to run Office, and Office is just there, right? As if you had just closed it and reopened it. But if the system is so slow, the CPU has to sit there and crunch away at stuff, not just the hard drive. On a TC4400, I think that has SATA.
And it's a Core 2 Duo. It's usually a Core Duo or a Core 2 Duo CPU inside of that.
Right, and you're totally right on the don't stress that it's a SATA 6 gig drive and you only have SATA 3 on your mother. Do not even let that bother you. Seriously, I am running my system right here that I use day in and day out is still a SATA 3 gig system. It's actually probably the same motherboard you're running, Patrick. It's a Core i7 920. Just right, it's an X58 board. It only has SATA 3 gig. It just doesn't matter. You get it, you're getting so much of the gain anyway that you just don't need the extra speed. And a lot of those solid state drives in practice, even if they're 6 gigabit SATA, they probably are not writing at that speed, and they might read at that speed if they're going in a straight line, but you're not always going in a straight line for very long if you're reading it that fast. It's a half a gig per second. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do with that so fast? Where is it going?
Well, it's funny though, because people get so stats obsessed or so benchmarking obsessed. They're like, oh, it's going to be like 13% faster, and it's like, dude, you're running a rotating media drive. You're running a traditional hard drive. The solid state drive is going to be so much faster. You're not going to that 13%. You're not going to be able to feel it. You're going to put in a solid state drive in your notebook or in your desktop, and your hair is going to blow back like the old Maxell tape recording commercial. And it's kind of funny. We got a couple questions like, oh, what drives do you recommend for RAID 0 installations? I want to speed up my drives even more. And at some point, even with the latest processors, you're starting looking at it's just a massive diminishing returns kind of situation. You could stripe across two drives and turn a couple of 128s into a 256 gigabyte drive, but it's kind of amazing how fast they are, no matter what kind of connection is going to your motherboard to the CPU.
I'll tell you the really huge difference for solid state that I noticed. I reviewed a 1 terabyte Velociraptor not too long ago. Right, this is basically the fastest spinning disk that you can put in a consumer system, at least.
Right.
And just for giggles, I had my existing this same Windows install actually that I'm talking to you on right now. I cloned it over from my solid state over to the Velociraptor, and then I tried to reboot. And what I hadn't thought of was, now if I had done a clean install on that Velociraptor, I'm sure the system would have booted in a decent time and it wouldn't have been not that bad. However, if you have a Windows install going for a year, all that stuff, just all that crud that you just have on your PC from installs and uninstalls and everything, that kind of stuff, a solid state drive just can just blow right past. It just powers right through it, right? But that same kind of stuff, you put it on a spinning disk. After I cloned my OS to that Velociraptor, I was like 5 minutes into a boot before I can pull up a start menu. It was horrible. And that was on the fastest hard drive. And it was still like unbearable. Like that would have been the point where I just blew away that install and reinstalled everything. But I just cloned it right back over to the solid state, and here I am, still talking. Right, so and it's fast. It's snappy again.
Yeah, it's kind of they just kind of change the rules for sort of input and output. One last question before we go. Lido Blue says, should I be scared about installing a solid state drive if I've never done it? What software tools should be used? When you say software tools, I'm going to assume that you mean, like Alan was just mentioning, imaging your drive and moving it to the new hard drive. Super Duper is kind of the classic cloning tool.
You got to be careful. You got to be careful. There's a big ouchie waiting to happen here. It's called alignment. Okay, so solid state drives like things to be aligned, at least on a 4 kilobyte boundary.
Okay.
Now, if you do a clean Windows install to a drive from Windows 7 on, actually Windows Vista on, it will always put a partition on a multiple of, I believe it's 2 megabytes or 1 megabyte worth of space, which of course is a multiple of 4 kilobytes. It's in there somewhere. Here's the problem. If you try to use cloning software, unless the cloning software is SSD aware, which I think Paragon is really the only one that's come out with one that's smart enough. I think the most recent version of Paragon does it. I'm not sure on Acronis. The problem is the imaging software will try to resize the drive as it clones it over, right? Because it'll ask you, do you want to use, the drive's bigger or small? It'll do what it needs to do. Problem is, sometimes they'll resize that little 200 meg imaginary partition that Windows puts on there, the recovery partition. Sometimes they'll resize that to an uneven multiple, and then your C drive will start at a weird offset. So it won't be a 4K offset. Now, here's what happens. That actually does like double to triple of the equivalent random access to the drive. So that will actually slow it down over time, much worse than if you just did a clean install. So my recommendation is when you get the solid state drive, and if you're privy enough with computer stuff to handle a reinstall on your own, that's the time to do it. Because then you're just starting fresh. You're creating the partition, and actually for this guy, if you're listening right now, just install it like you just installed a new hard drive. Have your other hard drive as a slave somewhere, somewhere else on the controller. Actually, just leave it unplugged when you do the install. Just unplug that, put the solid state drive in. Right? It's the only drive in the system. Do your Windows install. Once it's up and running, you can plug your old drive in, start moving all your stuff over, whatever you want to keep. At least that way you did a clean install, everything is aligned properly, you didn't have to mess with it, and you'll just be golden from that point forward.
The best thing about having you on the show is I always learn something new.
Yeah, that is an issue. I actually burned myself on it when I cloned my OS back to my solid state drives. Yeah.
That would be bad. Paragon Migrate OS to SSD 2.0. Quote, the easiest OS migration to new solid state drive tool out there, $19.95 for a license on that. Paragon actually is doing some really cool tools. If you've never actually run into some of their software in there. And I'm trying to think, there should be NTFS for Mac OS 10. I highly recommend if you actually want to be able to read and write to Windows NTFS formatted drives from your Mac machine. NTFS for Mac OS 10 is worth the $20. It is extremely useful. But so generally, though, speaking, though, Allyn, whenever possible, clean, fresh install of Windows or OS 10 on your new SSD.
Yeah, if you're moving to an SSD, that's a good excuse to do it.
That's probably going to be where we wrap it. I want to thank everybody for their solid state drive questions. Allyn, you got anything exciting coming up on PC Pro next week?
Actually, there's something I can slip in here. I'm just about to post on, but
sure.
Today, Western Digital announced MyBook Velociraptor Duo. It's a dual Velociraptor external hard drive. It's kind of cool, and it uses Thunderbolt.
Oh,
so
cool.
while it'll initially be Mac specific, I guess there are already Z77 motherboards that have Thunderbolt on them. So I'm pretty sure it will work on them. But yeah, it's basically just two Velociraptors in a RAID.
Nice.
In a RAID 0, actually. Well, I mean, those are drives that are reliable enough that I would consider RAID 0 worthy. I don't want to say safe, but worthy.
Were you a little frightened of the Acer S5 doing the RAID 0 kind of striping configuration?
Yeah, just a little.
Actually, we just found the picture for the Velociraptor Duo. That's actually okay. It's like five.
It just looks like a really thick MyBook. Yeah.
Are you starting to get excited about Thunderbolt above and beyond the $50 cable cost, or is it just boring to you at this point?
No. I'm very excited. I'm crazy bullish on Thunderbolt. That's yeah. It's just it's a really fast connect. It's 10 gigabit. If you have any kind of external storage, that makes those types of things realistic, right?
Right.
Drobo's trying to come out with a pair of Thunderbolt enabled things that'll hopefully, if they can get anywhere near saturating it. Ryan already looked at a Paragon external RAID, not Paragon, Promise. Promise made an external RAID, little external NAS box, and he was getting like 800 meg per second out of it. So yeah, really, you have a hard time getting that on internal bandwidth, right? And here's something that you could just plug in as an external unit. It's definitely a nice leap up from USB 3. That's for sure.
That's a good thing. Not too much coming up on Techzilla for the Labor Day episode. We're going to talk about speeding up your PC, how to recycle batteries, and if you can trust those companies that send you a box to recycle your batteries in the mail. How much HDTV you really need. Trust us, you want a bigger one than you think you do. And gaming on your home theater and MSSDs and why it's a good idea to put one in your motherboard or your notebook, even on Windows 8, coming up on Techzilla next week, TEKZILLA.com. And Allyn, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight and for shotgunning all of our SSD questions. That was a mighty dog pile of questions you went after there.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
PCPer.com is where you can find Allyn, where he does the majority of the storage reviews. And, of course, I'm Patrick Norton from Techzilla, and we want to thank you on behalf of the TWiT family for watching the show today. That's it for this edition of Twitch. We'll see you next week.
See you.
Need a muff for that thing when you got to use it too.
Yeah, it's
been demuffed. See, Al's fondling his muff for you.
Don't fondle your muff, man. It's creepy.
Oh, sorry. I got to turn down too. Yeah.
Be afraid. Be afraid.